Okay. This is not episode 2. Episode 2 has not been constructed yet. But I feel that there's a topic that needs to be addressed. As some of you know, I am a former neo-Confederate, as they call it. Neo-Confederate, it's a very broad term, actually. Some among the crowd do not actually like the term. They prefer to think of themselves as just Confederate. But for the sake of time, I'll say neo-Confederate. What it basically meant was, I was a strong supporter of the Confederacy. That, to those of you not from the U.S., that would mean the Confederate States of America. I was a big supporter of this, even after I became Muslim, for a while. But that kind of changed because I read more, and the more I read, the more I understood, and it just kind of goes from there. But you see, with the shooting in Charleston, it's been a major topic: the Confederate flag, the Confederate flag, Confederate flag. And yes, there's a lot of people in the South that are pissed off. Was the Confederate flag racist? That is the stupidest question I've ever heard. Yeah, sure, it was racist. I can go with that. Yeah. Is it a symbol of racism? That's a hard topic, because the Civil War was not about slavery. Now, what I want you to understand when I say that is that I no longer am a supporter of the Confederacy. I'm not for it. Don't get it twisted. I didn't like the Union either. Yeah, I'm a paradox that way. But in a way, it kind of is a symbol of prejudice. It's been taken up by many organizations that teach, preach, and act on racism. And regardless of what it originally meant, as long as those organizations continue to exist and continue to use that symbol, that's what it's going to mean. I find it really funny that, and I say this having been one of the people that did it, I find it really funny that some of these people will try and say, well, that's not what it originally meant, that's not what it originally meant. But at the same time, they will be mad about a swastika. Now, the swastika was not originally the symbol of the Nazis. It predates the Nazis by thousands of years. Matter of fact, the swastika actually predates Judaism. That's how old it is. It's an old Hindu symbol. It means power. That's why the advisors for Hitler suggested him using it, because it was a symbol of power. But now, because it was used by the Nazis in World War II, it's a symbol of prejudice. It's a symbol of hate. So, in the same respect that the swastika is now considered a symbol of hate, a symbol of prejudice, you have to say that the Confederate flag, or actually the flag of Northern Virginia, the battle flag of Northern Virginia, or the Navy Jack, depending on who's flying it, is a symbol of hatred and prejudice. And for the individuals that want to cling to the ideology of the former Confederate States of America, there's other flags. We all know this. Okay, anybody that has studied like any real in-depth to the history of the Confederacy, all 4 years, they know that the flag that was synonymous with the Confederate States of America was not that flag. The flag that was associated with the South was not that flag. Each state flew their own independent flag. That was the flag that was associated with them. Then, if you want to say that there was a symbol that was, universally adopted across the South during the time of the Confederacy, it was the Bonnie Blue, or the original Confederate flag, which was still not, the battle flag. Then, the Confederate flag, or the so-called Confederate flag, was not even the national flag. So, not sure where that all comes in there. Clinging to tradition and ignorance. Now, this is where I usually piss off everybody. The neo-Confederates and similar mentality individuals are somewhat correct. The Civil War was not fought over slavery. Exactly. Slavery was involved on both sides, but it was not the center point. Okay, I'm going to have to back up just a little bit. Before the Civil War, okay, we all know that the Civil War started in 1860, ended in 1864, I think, 65, depending on how you want to look at it. But in 1850, a compromise was made by a major individual in politics. I'm not really sure who made the 1850 compromise. Henry Clay. Okay. Henry Clay is the one that actually made the 1850 compromise. Now, the way that this compromise worked, okay, because the U.S. was starting to have more territories that were wanting to be part of the United States of America, lowercase. Now, with the way that they were working it, because there was a strong parallel between the northern industrialized states and the primarily agricultural southern states, mostly the southeast, because a lot of the southwest really did not exist. So the compromise that was come up between the Democratic Party, which was primarily the South, a few Democrats were in the North, and the Republicans, which were primarily Northerners, was that the states would be admitted in pairs. You would have one free state and one slave state. And this was done to sort of keep the balance, because anyone that understands politics knows that every state gets 2 senators. Okay? Now, if you have 2 states coming in that are free states, then you have 4 senators coming in that will represent the non-slavery mentality, and they will not be looking out for the interest of states or individuals that might have slaves, and vice versa. Now, on top of this, okay, you had another issue, what they called the 1/3 law. This wasn't the Constitution. It was by the Founding Fathers. Every slave represents 1/3 of a person. Well, the way that the House of Representatives originally worked, they've slightly altered it some now, where they just redraw the districts, is that The representation in the House of Representatives was based on population. Higher population, more representatives. That simple. So you have more states with slaves, you have more representatives for the slave owners. You're starting to get the picture yet. There was a political battle brewing, and it had been brewing for some time. In fact, it was actually said and noted by many historians that if Lincoln had lost the election, the North would have seceded from the Union. That's a fact. That's not an opinion, that's a fact. The cause of the so-called Civil War was actually it was a political struggle. The southern states were used to a particular way of life, and they were afraid of losing that particular way of life. And rather than doing what England did, which was to offer financial compensation to the slave owners and to also offer some sort of way where they could make up their revenue, make up the way that they're losing all of this, they just wanted to say, free them. However, the real issue was the politicians. And people got drawn into it. The issue where they keep saying state rights, yes, it was about state rights. But what they were claiming was that it was the state's right to decide whether or not they wanted to own slaves. That was the real issue. And this was played quite dramatically by the Republican and Democratic parties. So really, no matter which way you want to slice it, whether you want to say that you're a supporter of the Union, or you want to say that you're a supporter of the Confederacy, as far as historically speaking, it was a political battle between the emerging Republican Party, because they were a new party at the time, and the Democratic Party. Now, the Democratic Party did actually somewhat sever during this time, to the point where a lot of the Democrats actually started siding with the Republicans, and that was because of where they were living. It just was not popular. And we can still see that today, where the Democrats, they'll call themselves Democrats, will actually side closer towards what the Republican might be saying, because the district that they represent is more in line with that. So it would cost them their position if they sided with that. Now also, at this time, on top of your representatives, your House of Representatives who were elected, you also had senators. Now these senators, this is where it gets really interesting, were not elected by the general population. They were elected via the state through an electorate through the House of Representatives. So, yeah. Overall, political battle. That's what it was about. Now, as far as those trying to understand why there's still a lot of animosity in the South towards in the issue of the Civil War, why people are kind of sympathizing with the Confederacy. Okay, the stuff they are telling you about Lincoln is true. Lincoln was a racist. This is a fact, it's not an opinion. You can look it up. Read the Stephen Douglas and Abraham Lincoln speeches, when they were debating back and forth. Lincoln was a racist. He was an ardent racist. I mean, he hated black people. He thought that white people were vastly superior. That's true. But the main thing that makes it particularly hard for most of the South to and especially people who have not looked at all the complexities of the issue, and even some that have, was Sherman's march. Okay, you can try and justify a lot of the war, and actually a lot of the southern states did not even join in seceding until after Lincoln sent troops into his own country. But all of that really becomes a moot point when you decide that it's okay as a government to say, you are our people, you do not legally have the right to leave, and then at the same time say that, well, we have the right to kill civilians that we say that are part of our country. They never actually left. It's illegal for them to leave. Sherman, on his march to Atlanta, and his soldiers killed, murdered, raped, burned. ISIS has nothing on Sherman. Now, I know that's a lot to go over. I'm sorry. I was trying to cover the different points, but there it is for you folks. Yes, the Confederate battle flag should be considered a symbol of prejudice and hatred. Now, for individuals like the Sons of Confederate Veterans, they're not, and those opposed to them, Sons of Confederate Veterans are not about trying to resurrect the South. They're not about believing that the South was right or wrong, although there are some within it that take different positions. Their point is about honoring the ancestors, honoring the soldiers that fought, because a lot of these people didn't even own slaves. They were fighting because they thought that it was the patriotic thing to do to fight for their state. Were they wrong? Probably. Were we wrong to go to Vietnam? Probably. But we still honor those soldiers. That's all they're trying to do, honor their family. Do I agree with it? No. But when they go around, the Sons of Confederate Veterans, and they fly a Confederate battle flag, it's because they're fixing to actually do a live action sort of play where they reenact an old battle to remember the history. It has nothing to do with prejudice. Now, a flag being on a Confederate battle flag, as it's called, being on a government property, that's insanity. However, the same people that are so opposed to the Confederate battle flag, okay, and the fact that the shooter in South Carolina was using one, well, that's true. I can appreciate the sentiment towards the flag. I can understand it. I can understand, what's going on there. But what you have to realize is sleight of hand. while you were busy looking over here, no one wanted to look over here. If you read, like I did, the journal thing that they credit to the shooter, Dylan Roof, I think, or something like that, and you read through what he says and what he talks about, there's a lot of major issues to really be discussed, that need to be discussed in a really major public setting, and it needs to be discussed now. The fact that everyone's focus was on the flag is insanity, and I'm opposed to the flag. Y'all chose to go over, take down the flag, don't fly it over a government building. Okay, fine. But who is it that was building projects in New York City? Pretty sure that was not a Confederate flag-loving man. Who is it that was building projects in ghettos in Los Angeles and constantly, sending a message of hatred and bigotry? Those people were not flying Confederate flags. People were distracted from the real issue. And as part of the V Nation, that is all that I have to say on this matter. Thank you, and good night.